kids type every day. And those days, it was really expensive. I remember having a £500 phone bill at the time. So the price of the phone bill, we was making less and less calls, so I wasn't distancing myself more.
On the other end of those calls, my nanny found the absence of my mum and the rest of her children very hard. Eventually, Nanny's marriage broke down, and my granddad also moved away to Canada. She gets emotional when I ask her about her children being so far away.
I looked after them and were little, and now they get big. I would open them up. I would like to sleep with them. Many days when I lie in the bed, I miss my kids. I do love my kids, and it's a hard thing, and it's a painful thing, and I take them miles away from me. I can't touch them. I can't hug them. It's really painful.
Although Nanny has been without her children around her, she often takes people into her care. She informally adopted a woman called Marlin, who now lives with her. Marlin helps Nanny with household chores and keeps her company, and in return, Nanny gives her food and a room. A young girl called Sasha lives in the bottom floor of her house. Often she can't pay rent, so Nanny doesn't demand anything and feeds her. Nanny chooses to give odd jobs around the house to unskilled local men. I think even if all her children stayed in Guyana, Nanny would still have looked after other people, because that's just who she is. Being in my nanny's house is completely different from the world I grew up in. People are always dropping in, family, friends and neighbours just walking past will come over for a chat. My mum's lived with my stepfather Chris in a quiet, reserved English town for so long that even she finds Nanny's house a shock.
I feel like I'm visiting my mom in a place that she lives and cares for people. In and out, giving money, feeding. That's how it feels. It certainly doesn't set up like a home. It's very open house. I'm changing and walking out here like you would do in your home and think because only Chris would see me if I'm walking. But I'm walking out.
This is Phil Latzman. Thank you for listening to KJZZ's audio service, which is supported by Condor Airlines, offering new nonstop service from Phoenix to Frankfurt, Germany, and beyond, beginning May 18th, or condor.com.
Trust KJZZ for the perfect mix of BBC, NPR, and KJZZ News.
Stay in touch with KJZZ at kjzz.org and on your phone with the KJZZ mobile app.
Special thank you to our Leadership Society members Gordon Causa and Dorothy Pierce for their generous support in bringing programs like Morning Edition and Marketplace to KJZZ. If you are passionate about in-depth news and fact-based journalism, please visit leadership.kjzz.org.
KJZZ is a service of Rio Salado College. It's 3:52.
The financial crisis 10 years on will catch up with the woman who saw it coming.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Deloitte, offering audit and IPO readiness services and tools to help companies prepare for their IPO. Deloitte.com/US/EGC. And by Baird, a financial partner guiding families, businesses, communities, and institutions since 1919. RWBaird.com has more information.
The administration cites national security for stopping the $117 billion purchase after a federal panel that reviews proposed international mergers came to the same conclusion. Broadcom says there is no threat to U.S. security and is reviewing options now. My colleague Molly Wood, host of Marketplace Tech, is following this.
Broadcom is based in Singapore. We are not necessarily concerned about Singapore spying on the United States, but this is part of a pattern toward trying to keep Asian competitors out of similar businesses and out of the infrastructure of the United States. The United States has effectively banned the Chinese manufacturer Huawei and ZTE from using wireless equipment in government contracts because we're concerned that the Chinese government could essentially have a tap on the lines.
Now, this blocked merger comes at a time when telecom companies around the world are thinking about a new generation of wireless communication. It's called 5G, and it would be way faster, fast enough to let driverless cars talk to each other and link all manner of appliances into the so-called Internet of Things.
Qualcomm and Broadcom have both been working on 5G technology, and this is considered profoundly essential to the future of wireless networking. And the US is concerned that Broadcom, which is known for having a pretty lean operation, might cut money for research and development into 5G technologies, so much so that it could allow Chinese competitors to jump in and essentially fill that void. Now, if Huawei or another Chinese manufacturer becomes the only game in town for 5G infrastructure technology, then the government would have to buy equipment from one of these companies. And again, you get to this sort of wiretapping concern.
Marketplace's Molly Wood, who's host of Marketplace Tech. Now, Broadcom, based in Singapore now, was started by a professor and student from UCLA. Let's do the numbers. The 100-share index in London has just turned up 2 points. Dow and S&P futures are up in the 2 to 0.3% range.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Invest Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, a European location with a skilled, agile workforce focused on results. More at investni.com. And by Constant Contact, featuring email marketing tools to help small businesses connect with their existing customers and list growth tools for collecting new contacts. Learn more at constantcontact.com. And by Epson, innovating the future of display technology with laser projection. Where there's business, there's Epson. Learn more at epson.com/forbusiness.
10 years ago this week, what had seemed like a fixture on Wall Street found itself on the brink of collapse. The investment bank Bear Stearns would then get bought up by J.P. Morgan Chase, an outcome pushed by government officials worried about the financial system unraveling. If only someone had seen the financial crisis coming and sounded some warning. Any warning? Well, today a conversation with someone who had warned early and often, first at the Treasury Department, then at the FDIC, which insures bank deposits. Sheila Bair, as early as 2001, was saying that risky real estate loans were a disaster waiting to happen. As she speaks with me here in 2018, she remains critical of regulators.
I regret that there was too much focus on the impact on the banks and the losses that the banks were suffering, and not about on the underlying driver of the crisis, which was all these unaffordable mortgages. And that hurt the economic recovery because we had this huge mortgage debt overhang that was depressing consumer spending.
Porque vas stations in California. KERU Live, KBBF Calistoga Santa Rosa, KWXCLP Coachella, and Arizona. KYXC Somerton, Yuma, Arkansas, KABF Little Idaho, KBSX HD3 Boise, Iowa, KWIT Sioux City, KOJI Okoboji, KALA HD2 Davenport, K291BP Bettendorf, Texas, KXJT Rio Grande City, Washington State, KSBR Mount Vernon, and in Wyoming, KOCA Laramie.
two insanely bloody wars, World Wars I and II, and they thought, if we have a shared economic future, then we won't have another war. I don't think that the European Union experiment is going. It's working out really, really well for Germany, but you talk to Greeks or Portuguese or Irish or whatever. Well, the Irish like the EU because it gives them access to the continent, but you talk to a lot of folks in other countries, and they'll tell you that their sense of it is that basically the EU is simply Germany's way of having won World War II. It's
right.
The euro in particular, going with a single currency. But to your question about Reagan, I define neoliberalism as the belief that markets are better than democracy, essentially, and that marketplaces should be making decisions rather than governments and people, and that the power that we traditionally hold on behalf of the people by government, that power should instead reside, quote, in the marketplace. And by in the marketplace, the way it always ends up being played out is by those who control the marketplace, which is the wealthiest and most powerful, the largest corporations. And so the question, a neoliberal question is always what's best for the big corporations. And, doing away with tariffs was great for big corporations. It's not necessarily great for the United States. All our jobs went overseas, and it's not good for our security, our national security. I mean, the border crossing guards, the ICE guys down in Mexico, the border crossing guys, or the border patrol, they're wearing uniforms manufactured in Mexico. I mean, how weird is that, right? So
why is it neoliberal as opposed to neoconservative?
Well, it's using the word liberal in the context of the British use of that word, the European use of that word. In Europe, if you say liberal, what you mean is what we mean as conservative here in the United States, or as corporatist, let's say.
Okay. All right.
So, and this is the new iteration of 19th century European liberalism, and we're really kind of getting in the weeds here, Stephen. I think the bottom line is that this experiment, this neoliberal experiment that, we really went into in a big way, Thatcher in 78 and Reagan in 80, both the United States and Europe and the UK, has turned out to be a failure. It does, the theory was that we were all rich enough that if we turned everything over to the big corporations and we encouraged transnational corporate activity, that would eliminate the possibility of another world war, number one, and frankly, I don't think that we're even close to that. In fact, I think that we're staring down the barrel potentially of a war with China specifically.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they are militarizing at an insanely rapid rate, and they're the whole conflict around the Spratly Islands and the stuff in the South China Sea is amping up the tensions between China and Japan and South Korea, and now you've got Taiwan, involved in the mix, and it's just, and there's the Euripides, Euclid. Anyhow, he's a Greek philosopher. The trap that's named after him, which was that when an emerging economy begins to surpass a long dominant economy, that those countries typically end up at war, and that's a very real concern. So those are the things.
I see North Korea as a buffer for Japan, for China.
Yeah, they do too.
Nuclear weapons on their border, but they don't get called on it. So I don't think China's really interested in denuclearizing North Korea.
If they were, they would have stopped Kim a long time ago, because without China's support, Kim ceases to exist. North Korea just can't. So North Korea, China's using North Korea as a separator from South Korea. The Korean Peninsula is attached to that part of the continent. And
they're a pseudo-nuclear threat.
Yeah. And, by proxy, from us. But yeah, excellent point. Stephen, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Good talking with you. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks. When you opened the show, you were talking about trade policy and how tariff represents these benefits. And I was suddenly made to think about modern monetary theory and the value it represents and where it comes from. Both of these things are generated by the structure that creates the market. This is government. This is government direction. So tariffs are created by Washington. The idea of MMT is with the Fed, again, government. And I was thinking about how if both of these things were practiced in the same direction, there'd be this bookended reinforcement, and there'd be this support for the means of production. In other words, that which the workers control.
Right.
And the idea that there has been this purposeful demobilizing and a divide and rule that has been perpetrated by that which we call our governance. I'm reminded of a statement from the Scott Noble tripart plutocracy. And I think it was in Solidarity Forever, which was the second of the three. There's divide et impera, solidarity forever, and then class warfare. Carnegie Steelworks plant manager Jay Gould said, I can always hire half the poor to kill the other half.
Right. Yeah, this is the issue of tariffs, of trade policy. The larger, and Rich, thank you for the call. The larger issue here is that we need to have a national conversation about developing a national industrial policy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Just, slapping his tariff on steel to try to help a Republican in Pennsylvania is not going to do it, right? We need a national, comprehensive policy. Okay, welcome back. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, I was thinking, historically, the taxation without representation was really the real problem with tax inequality. You had wealth Americans, going against the king, cutting into their wealth. I would like to upgrade that rally cry for the birth of our country to economics, no economy with no representation. Because, basically, when you have a monopolized inequality, how can one claim to be civilized? Because the DNA of being civilized is cooperation, not exploitation.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say, the Bernie went to Wall Street and said, hey, greed isn't good. But he didn't push the envelope and say the system monopolized greed. So I think we need to that level to make people understand that, we're not really democratic. We legalize inequality we not putting our money where our mouth is.
Well, and the pushback on that, Jesse, or not pushback, but the thing that you inspired me to think about, shall we say, is that you're saying you can't have a functioning economy, or at least a fair economy, without representation of the average person and the worker in particular in the economy. In other words, democracy. And there is a form of democracy in the workplace. It's called a union. And by systematically destroying unions, I mean, this was the work of Ronald Reagan's life, was to destroy unions, and he did it, and to a large extent. And now the Supreme Court may finish them off, and in this case, there was just... Go ahead.
Can I back on that? When you say the unions is a representation of democracy, how can it be? Because the boss has absolute power.
No, he doesn't, because the union is a democratic institution, and if the union members say, we're not going to go along with what the boss says, they go on strike. And the laws, the Wagner Act, protects their right to go on strike. Prior to 1935, they didn't have that right. So the laws that defend unionization defend the right of democracy in the workplace. That's my argument.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. A draft report's been put together by Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, finding no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia in the 2016 election. The GOP says it's finished interviewing witnesses and will brief Democrats on its findings later today. Texas Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro says Democrats believe there was collusion.
What we had a responsibility to do was to figure out just how damaging that has been to our democracy. And this really, in a sense, is a betrayal of the public trust because the House committee failed to do that job.
Castro was speaking to NPR's Morning Edition. The draft report does conclude Russia interfered in the election in part through cyber attacks and social media. The Turkish military says it's surrounding the Syrian city of Afrin in the country's northwest. Here's NPR's Peter Kenyon.
Turkey has vowed to clear YPG Syrian Kurdish fighters away from its border. In a statement, the Turkish military says the Afrin city center is completely surrounded. Analysts say an operation inside the urban center would carry a high risk of casualties. Washington says it understands Turkey's need to secure its border, but supports the YPG as allies in the fight against ISIS.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is in Afghanistan today. His unannounced visit includes talks in Kabul with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. I'm Dave Mattingly in Washington.
On the next Fresh Air, we talk with investigative journalists Michael Isikoff and David Korn, author of the new book Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump. They've both broken key stories about Trump and the Trump campaign's ties with Russia. Join us.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Farmers Insurance, committed to helping people understand the ins and outs of insurance so they can prepare for life's ups and downs. Coverage options and more information can be found at farmers.com. From Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. From C3 IoT, providing
we've all encountered patients in our district that are not gaining access to this treatment, and they're being rejected because they're being told that some of these drugs are not safe, and these are people with terminal illnesses. So that argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them.
So you're saying what's the risk for people who are already going to die, quite frankly, if this is their last option, you want to give it to them. But if they're using what could be a really dangerous drug, couldn't it bring about their passing earlier in some cases, or just make their last days more unbearable? There are risks.
Well, that's a criticism that's been rebunked, Rachel. The Right to Try Act that has been, I mean, this is a nationwide movement, and it would ensure that terminally ill patients, together with their physicians and their pharmaceutical manufacturers, can administer these treatments where no alternative exists. And this would prevent the government from blocking access to potentially life-saving medications. And these patients, Rachel, and their family members, I mean, it's very important to them that they be the ones to make these decisions. With the House version, we have patient protection provisions, we have physician protection provisions. All stakeholders have been heard out. There was originally some resistance from some groups, but a lot of these stakeholders have been brought to the table and are signing off on this. So this was not something that has been being rushed to the floor. Quite to the contrary. I mean, the reason that it's taken the amount of time it has is because we wanted to consider all stakeholders and their concerns.
Although the American Cancer Society still has a problem with this, and there are concerns that the negative consequences of these drugs won't be traced by the FDA. So if someone takes one of these experimental things that hasn't gone through the vetting system, and it turns out being really bad for them,
Autry, and I'd like to tip my cap to K. Jewell for lending a helping hand to our local organizations.
1051.
Heaven only knows where you've been. I don't really need to know. I know where you're gonna go. On my heart where you're resting your head. And you just look so beautiful. It's like you were an angel. Can I stop the flow of time? Or can I swim in your divine? 'Cause I don't think I'd ever leave this place. Oh, turn the lights down low. Yeah, now I'm feeling you breathing slow. 'Cause baby, we're just reckless kids, trying to find an island in the flood. Oh, turn the lights down low. Oh, moonlight, moves like J-Lo. Tell me what you want from me, I'll do it if you say so. 'Cause you're the only one for me, I'm never gonna say no. I found me an angel.
Streaming support on Cap Radio comes from the Mondavi Center, UC Davis, presenting a diverse program of international artists from classical and jazz to Americana and world music, from spoken word to dance and theater. Calendar of events and tickets at mondaviarts.org.
Survey people under 18. But individually, it's clear many have developed strong opinions.
We need to change our gun law, and you need to be at least 21 or older to get a gun.
LaVonda Fuller is a junior at Franklin Learning Center in Philadelphia, named just about any policy question on guns, and she favors limiting access.
I'm scared of guns, so I don't like them at all.
She says that comes from her experience living in a rough part of Philadelphia. Fuller says shootings were common and her mom tried to protect her from the consequences, but that wasn't always possible. When Fuller was 8 or 9 years old, she watched as her mother cared for a boy who was shot.
And my mom was holding the boy in her hands, and she was like, get a spoon so he won't bite on his tongue. And he passed away right there.
I talked with more than a dozen high school-age students across the country, and a theme emerged in what they said. Their opinions depend a lot on how they experienced guns as a young child. Here's 16-year-old Reagan Donahue.
I live out in the woods, and so my dad has hunted my whole life, and I've shot guns pretty much since I've been able to hold them, and it's something that I enjoy doing.
Donahue is a junior at State College Area High School in central Pennsylvania. To her, guns mean family time, recreation, and personal safety.
They've just been seen as almost like a protector, so they were never really something that I've been afraid of.
Donahue thinks more law-abiding people should own guns, and she thinks restrictions should apply only to those who committed crimes or who have mental health issues. In Gold Beach, Oregon, Derek Punch is a senior at the local high school. He also has fond memories hunting with his dad, but then he had a very negative experience involving a gun.
I lost my father. He committed suicide when I was 13 years old with a handgun.
Still, that did not change his views. He opposes all but minimum restrictions on gun ownership.
That never even crossed my mind. The whole blaming it on the gun, the whole blaming it on, if he didn't have a gun at the time, or well, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, spoons don't make people fat. Guns don't kill people. It's as simple as that.
Punch argues that his dad was responsible for his own death, not the gun. But some teenagers have changed their views because of a bad experience. Amina Johnson is a senior at Cheltenham High School outside Philadelphia.
A couple of years ago, one of my friend's mother was killed by a gun in a domestic violence incident, and ever since then I felt like I understand having guns for hunting or personal safety, but I feel like it gets to a point where it's just excessive and ridiculous and not necessary.
It's clear that many high school students have well-developed opinions about how to regulate guns, and, like previous generations, they don't seem interested in compromise. Jeff Brady, NPR News, Philadelphia.
This is NPR News.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. President Trump visits Southern California today. In San Diego, he'll be examining prototypes for a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. NPR's Nathan Rott says demonstrations for and against the president are expected.
California is undoubtedly a blue state, one that's made a point lately of challenging the Trump administration's policies at just about every turn. But there are pockets and valleys of red here, too. Trump should expect to see some of that in San Diego, as supporters are planning a rally for him. And you hope to see more support during a fundraiser in Beverly Hills, where donors will reportedly be able to give up to $250,000 to the RNC and his re-election campaign.
The National Weather Service says Boston could get up to 2 feet of snow by the time the latest nor'easter moves away from New England. Blizzard warnings are also posted. The former German Nazi SS guard, known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, has died at the age of 96. NPR's Soraya Sarhadi-Nelson has more from Berlin.
Oskar Gröning's job was to record the money and valuables taken from arriving prisoners at Auschwitz. The court found him guilty of being an accessory to the murder of 300,000 Hungarian Jews there. But he never served a day in prison after being convicted in 2015 because of a series of appeals by his lawyers arguing he was too old and sick to serve time. He died in a hospital on Friday.
I'm Dave Mattingly, NPR News in Washington.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Even people with the best intentions can have bias. Take the example of a student who was trying to help someone in medical distress when another woman approached.
My student was very committed to addressing issues of sexism, looked up to her and earnestly said, "Are you a nurse?" And you can imagine the woman's not a nurse, she was a doctor.
That's next time on Here and Now.